In the vast, wind-swept plains of South Dakota, where endless fields meet the horizon, there stood a solitary farmhouse, a place whispered about but rarely approached. On the surface, it was just another quiet home, untouched by time and woven into the fabric of rural life. But beneath its weathered exterior, something darker thrived. Inside, a family of sisters lived cloistered away from the world, bound by silence thicker than the walls around them. No one in the nearby town spoke openly of the house, as if fear had woven itself into their voices, or perhaps guilt. What secrets could a family so isolated possibly hide? Behind locked doors and shuttered windows, a sinister legacy festered, one that blurred the lines between love, control, and something far more unsettling. This was not just a story of broken girls, but of a house that devoured its daughters whole. As we peel back the layers of this chilling tale, prepare to confront a darkness that challenges what we think we know about family, loyalty, and the cost of silence. The origins of the sisters' story begin with a man whose name faded into whispered rumors, a father whose retreat from society was as complete as it was mysterious. He chose this remote farmhouse, miles from the nearest neighbor, to raise his daughters away from prying eyes and societal norms. At first glance, isolation might seem a protective shield, a way to guard innocence from the corrupt outside world. Yet beneath this veneer of safety, a far more toxic reality took root. The vast emptiness surrounding the house wasn't freedom. It was a prison without walls. Deprived of normal social contact, the sisters grew up in a bubble where their father's rules shaped every breath, every thought. Without external influence, their world contracted, distorting into a twisted echo chamber of fear, control, and devotion that warped their understanding of love and family. This enforced solitude bred dependency, but also suspicion and paranoia, as the sisters became both captives and accomplices in a cycle they could neither escape nor fully comprehend. What began as isolation to protect became a crucible where darkness was forged, and the seeds of tragedy were sown deep into the family's roots. At first glance, the sisters appeared inseparable, a united front forged by shared blood and circumstance. But beneath the surface of their closeness lay a labyrinth of unspoken rules and guarded whispers. Their bond was less about sisterly affection and more about survival within a house ruled by fear. Each sister wore a mask, some submissive, others silently rebellious, but all trapped in a delicate dance of dependence and distrust. The silence between them was deafening. They communicated in glances and gestures, conveying fears and warnings no outsider could decipher. Their shared history was a tapestry woven with dark rituals, forbidden knowledge, and complicit secrets that bound them tighter than any chain. This sisterhood was a paradox, both a refuge from the father's oppressive control and a prison that perpetuated their isolation. In their shared confinement, loyalty became twisted into complicity, love into obligation. This closeness concealed fractures, simmering resentments, and a pervasive fear that one misstep could shatter the fragile order. Theirs was a bond shaped by trauma, where protection and imprisonment intertwined, setting the stage for a story where sisterhood was both salvation and damnation. If you're fascinated by dark, twisted true stories that reveal the hidden corners of human nature, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing the global community come together to explore these sinister histories. Your support helps bring these haunting tales to life, so don't miss what's coming next. Rumors began like soft murmurs drifting through the tight-knit South Dakota town, whispers carried by wind and wary neighbors who spoke only in half-truths. On the surface, life seemed unchanged. The sisters kept to themselves, the farmhouse remained shrouded in quiet, and no overt harm was ever confirmed. Yet beneath this calm, something undeniably wrong simmered just out of sight. Strange noises, low sobbing at odd hours, a sudden crash, the unsettling echo of footsteps when no one should have been there, reached the ears of those nearby. Children were warned to avoid the property, and grown men averted their gaze, as if acknowledging the darkness invited it closer. These early signs were dismissed as mere superstition or the natural consequence of rural solitude, but for those who listened closely, the dissonance was unmistakable. The townsfolk's reluctance to intervene masked a deeper unease, born from fear, apathy, or perhaps an unspoken understanding of how fragile their community really was. These first whispers planted seeds of doubt, weaving a growing tension between what was seen and what was feared. The question lingered: what horrors could be hidden behind the farmhouse walls, hidden so well that even the echoes were hesitant to escape? Beneath the golden waves of South Dakota's cornfields, innocence was not spared. It was shattered. The youngest sister, a fragile child with wide eyes and trembling hands, became the silent witness to horrors too dark for words. On the surface, the field seemed a place of play and freedom, a refuge from the suffocating walls of the house. But underneath that pastoral facade, shadows stretched long and cold. Here, laughter was rare, replaced by whispered threats and unseen bruises. The youngest sister's world was a cruel dichotomy, a girl expected to be both obedient and invisible, her pain dismissed as childish imagination. Her fractured spirit mirrored the corrupted landscape, a place where nature's beauty masked the growing rot beneath. The trauma she endured seeped into the very soil, staining memories that could never be erased. Her innocence, once a fragile bloom, withered under the weight of betrayal and neglect. This loss was not isolated. It echoed through the family, infecting bonds and breeding a silence so heavy it threatened to suffocate any hope of escape. The cornfields became a grim symbol, where childhood ended abruptly, and the sinister reality of the sisters' world took full, terrifying shape. The father loomed over the family like a dark cloud, an imposing figure whose presence was felt even when absent. To the outside world, he was a recluse, a man who rarely ventured beyond the dirt road leading to the farmhouse. But within those walls, his influence was absolute and unyielding. He was both tyrant and god, a figure wrapped in contradictions, capable of cold cruelty yet occasionally showing fleeting glimpses of a warped affection. His control was psychological as much as physical, shaping the sisters' reality with an iron will and a chilling indifference to their suffering. He cultivated an environment where fear was the currency, loyalty enforced through silence and submission. Underneath his stern exterior, some whispered of madness, delusions that twisted his mind and justified unspeakable acts. Yet his power was not just fear. It was the twisted love of a father desperate to protect his family from a world he despised, even if that protection meant destruction. This shadow he cast was long and suffocating, warping the daughters' identities and binding them to a fate they could neither challenge nor escape. In the father's silence, the darkest horrors found fertile ground, and the house became a prison ruled by a shadow no one dared confront. The sisters lived bound by unseen chains, restraints far heavier than metal, forged from fear, obligation, and shattered trust. Though their bodies moved freely within the farmhouse, every step was dictated by rules carved deep into their minds by years of oppression. The walls were silent witnesses to whispered threats and broken promises, to moments when freedom was imagined only to be cruelly snatched away. Their captivity was not defined by physical locks alone, but by psychological barriers, an intricate web of manipulation and control that made escape seem impossible. Outside the house, the world was vast and unyielding, but inside, the sisters' universe was shrinking, trapped in cycles of submission and fleeting rebellion. They bore the weight of generations, inheriting a legacy that chained them not just to the house, but to each other in a suffocating bind. The illusion of safety masked the brutal reality. They were prisoners of a system built on silence and fear. Even their own desires became enemies, twisted into reminders of their entrapment. In this invisible prison, the sisters' struggle was as much with themselves as with the father's dominion, caught between yearning for freedom and the paralyzing power of unseen chains that held them fast. Among the sparse community surrounding the farmhouse, one man's unease grew like a slow-burning ember, an outsider who refused to look away. The local postman, a weathered figure accustomed to routine and silence, began noticing cracks in the sisters' carefully maintained facade. Letters left unopened, hurried glances through dusty windows, and the faint scent of despair hanging in the air unsettled him. At first, he dismissed these signs as rural eccentricity, but something deeper gnawed at his conscience. His suspicions were met with tight lips and averted eyes from neighbors unwilling to confront what lurked behind the farmhouse walls. Yet he persisted, driven by a mix of curiosity and a moral compulsion that set him apart. With every missed delivery and muffled scream, his questions grew louder, echoing the silent dread that gripped the town. But probing into the sisters' world came with risks of wrath from the father's shadow and the weight of collective denial. His growing suspicion illuminated the fragile boundary between neighborly concern and dangerous intervention, highlighting a community's struggle to face truths too horrific to name. In his quiet vigilance, the first flickers of resistance to the house's dark hold began to emerge, hinting at a fracture in the walls of silence. At the heart of the farmhouse stood a door that no one dared to open, an attic locked tight and cloaked in whispers. To outsiders, it was simply another forgotten room, a relic sealed off by time and neglect. But within the sisters' fractured world, the attic was a symbol of the deepest, most forbidden secrets. Its very presence cast a shadow over their daily lives, a constant reminder of what was hidden and what must never be revealed. Rumors swirled. Some said it held relics of dark rituals. Others believed it was a prison for things worse than physical shackles. The sisters themselves avoided mentioning it, their silence heavier than the door's rusty lock. This locked space became a psychological abyss, an unknown that bred fear and speculation. It embodied the layers of control the father wielded, a vault of horrors that shaped the family's twisted reality without ever being seen. The attic was both a physical barrier and a haunting metaphor, representing the parts of their lives buried beneath lies, pain, and unspoken trauma. Its locked door was a gatekeeper to a darkness so profound that even the sisters, bound by blood and silence, could not bring themselves to face what lay beyond. Buried beneath layers of dust and neglect, hidden letters whispered of a world the sisters longed for but were cruelly denied. These fragments of ink and paper carried hopes, fears, and desperate pleas, messages sent in secret, smuggled through the cracks of a suffocating existence. Each letter was a fragile thread connecting the isolated sisters to a reality beyond the farmhouse, revealing their yearning for freedom, connection, and understanding. Yet these communications were double-edged swords. They carried the risk of discovery, punishment, and further entrapment. The letters exposed a poignant duality, voices reaching out from darkness while simultaneously reinforcing the walls that kept them captive. Some were filled with coded cries for help. Others clung to memories of a past untouched by horror. Through these words, the sisters' inner worlds bled through, exposing vulnerabilities hidden beneath stoic facades. The outside world, distant yet tantalizingly close, became both a beacon of hope and a reminder of their imprisonment. In these letters lay the painful irony of connection, a lifeline to sanity and escape, yet also a reminder of how deeply the sisters were trapped in a house that swallowed their voices whole. Among the sisters, one bore the unbearable weight of silent rebellion, a fragile soul whose inner turmoil grew louder with each passing day, even as her lips remained sealed. She moved like a shadow within the house, her eyes betraying the storm raging beneath a calm exterior. This sister's quiet defiance took subtle forms: a refused glance, a hidden tear, a whispered prayer swallowed by the walls. Her psychological fractures deepened, manifesting in sleepless nights and fragmented thoughts that danced on the edge of madness. Yet her struggle was invisible to those who enforced silence, dismissed as mere weakness or obedience. This silent cry was a deed, desperate plea for salvation, a yearning for escape that clawed at her sanity. But trapped in a web of fear and loyalty, she wrestled with guilt for wanting more, for imagining a life beyond the house's grasp. Her rebellion was both a beacon of hope and a tragic flaw, fueling a fragile spark that could either ignite freedom or consume her entirely. In her silence lay the profound tragedy of a prisoner who could not speak, embodying the crushing weight of repression and the haunting question: how long can one endure before breaking? Outside the farmhouse, the town carried on, its daily rhythms untouched, its people willingly blind to the darkness that festered nearby. On the surface, neighbors exchanged polite greetings and maintained an uneasy civility, but beneath this veneer lay a pervasive denial. Fear whispered in the shadows, convincing many to look away rather than confront a nightmare too monstrous to face. The sisters' isolation was dismissed as eccentricity, their silence as family privacy. This collective blindness was a fortress built on discomfort, self-preservation, and perhaps complicity. Questions were left unasked. Warning signs were ignored. The townsfolk's inaction created a moral void where evil could grow unchecked, feeding on their silence as much as on the sisters' captivity. Some whispered rumors in hushed tones, while others outright refused to acknowledge the house at all, as if denial might erase its horrors. This societal failure was not born of malice alone, but of a fragile community grappling with fear, guilt, and the haunting possibility that they had all, in some way, become accomplices. The house's sinister secrets thrived precisely because the town's eyes were closed, and the cost of that blindness would soon demand a reckoning no one was prepared to face. One night shattered the fragile silence that had long cloaked the farmhouse, a night when the air itself seemed to hold its breath before releasing a torrent of terror. The sisters' screams tore through the darkness, raw and desperate, cutting through the stillness that had once masked their suffering. To the town, it was an unsettling rupture in the routine, a violent reminder that behind those shuttered windows lay a nightmare. Yet even as the screams echoed, no one dared cross the threshold. Fear and inertia froze the neighbors into silence, their hearts pounding with dread, but their feet rooted in place. The night became a crucible, exposing the raw fractures beneath the surface of the family's twisted bonds. The father's control, once unchallenged, began to waver under the weight of terror he could no longer contain. But the true horror was not just in the violence or the cries. It was in the community's paralyzing hesitation, the collective failure to intervene when salvation was most needed. This night marked a turning point, a fracture in the facade that could no longer hold, revealing the abyss that had long awaited its moment to swallow them whole. Into this suffocating darkness stepped a stranger, an outsider whose presence shattered the fragile equilibrium the family had maintained for years. Whether a social worker, distant relative, or curious journalist, this newcomer arrived armed with questions the sisters dared not voice, and a resolve that threatened the father's iron grip. Their intrusion sparked unease, a ripple that quickly became a wave, unsettling the oppressive routine that had held the household captive. The stranger's gaze peeled back layers of silence, challenging the sisters to confront truths they had buried deep. With every probing word and lingering glance, the fragile walls of deception began to crumble, exposing fractures long hidden beneath years of fear and complicity. But the stranger's arrival was a double-edged sword. It brought the hope of rescue, yet also ignited retaliation, increasing the stakes for everyone trapped within. This pivotal moment forced the family to confront the impossible, the clash between a world desperate to save them and the darkness that had become their identity. The stranger was a catalyst, unraveling the sinister threads woven through the sisters' lives and setting in motion a reckoning that none could escape. Beneath the brittle surface of forced unity, fractures began to appear, small fissures that hinted at a family unraveling from within. The sisters, once seemingly bound by shared trauma and unyielding loyalty, started to reveal their fractures in subtle but telling ways. Tensions simmered beneath quiet conversations, distrust flickered in hesitant glances, and suppressed resentments bubbled just beneath the surface. Moments of rebellion, once rare and isolated, grew bolder as individual desires clashed with the suffocating family code. The carefully maintained facade, this illusion of solidarity in the face of darkness, began to crumble, exposing raw nerves and fractured identities. Each sister wrestled privately with her role, protector, victim, or prisoner. Some longed desperately for escape, others feared the unknown beyond the house, and all were trapped in a painful dance of dependence and defiance. These cracks signaled not only the disintegration of their collective front, but also the possibility of liberation or destruction. The once impenetrable house of daughters was revealing its weaknesses, and with them the fragile hope that salvation might come even as the shadows threatened to consume what remained. Hidden beneath floorboards and behind loose panels lay a journal, its pages stained, torn, and laden with secrets too dangerous to be spoken aloud. This forbidden diary was a raw confession, a map into the darkest corners of the sisters' fractured souls and the twisted reality they endured. Within its fragile pages, whispers of abuse, cruelty, and unspeakable rituals spilled forth, written in trembling script that veered between despair and defiant hope. The journal peeled back the carefully constructed layers of silence, exposing the harrowing truth behind the family's facade. It revealed not only the physical torment, but also the psychological chains, fear, manipulation, and a warped sense of loyalty that held them captive. Each entry was a heartbeat echoing in the void, a desperate attempt to reclaim identity and sanity amidst chaos. The forbidden journal was both a relic of suffering and a beacon of resistance, its words challenging the lies that had bound them for so long. To read it was to stare directly into the abyss, a chilling testament to the sisters' resilience and the horrors they could no longer hide. Hope arrived like a fragile spark, carried by those determined to break the cycle of silence and suffering. But the attempt to rescue the sisters was met with brutal resistance, a devastating clash between salvation and the entrenched darkness within the farmhouse. What should have been a moment of liberation quickly spiraled into chaos, as fear and anger erupted in a desperate bid to maintain control. The father's wrath ignited with terrifying force, punishing both the sisters and those who dared to intervene. The community watched helplessly as the fragile lifeline snapped, leaving the sisters more isolated and broken than before. This failure deepened the shadows, crushing the tentative hope that had flickered in their hearts. It exposed the limits of outside. The intervention when met with years of psychological captivity and violence. The failed rescue became a grim turning point, a reminder that even the best intentions can falter in the face of entrenched evil, and that sometimes the walls of darkness only grow thicker when threatened. In this heartbreak lay a haunting question. How do you save those who no longer believe they can be saved? Beneath the guise of a fractured family lay something far more sinister, a cult-like devotion that twisted faith, fear, and obedience into a toxic religion. The father's authority transcended mere patriarchal control. It became a doctrine, a rigid creed the sisters were indoctrinated to follow without question. Rituals, cryptic and chilling, permeated their daily existence, blurring the line between spiritual salvation and psychological torment. Prayer was weaponized, and obedience demanded as a form of worship. The sisters' identities dissolved into roles dictated by this dark gospel, where questioning meant betrayal and silence was sanctity. This cult within the household cultivated an insidious power dynamic, transforming love into manipulation and faith into chains. It created a warped world where morality was rewritten to justify cruelty and suffering, trapping the sisters in a cycle of blind devotion that fed the father's dominion. The cult's influence seeped into their minds, reshaping reality until horror became normal and escape seemed sacrilege. This revelation forced a chilling reckoning. Beneath the surface of family lies a dark sect that ensnared the daughters in an unholy covenant, one that corrupted souls and shattered lives with devastating finality. Among the house of daughters, one sister disappeared without warning, leaving behind only silence and unanswered questions. Her vanishing was not just a physical absence, but a rupture in the fragile fabric holding the family together. On the surface, it was whispered as a fleeting escape or a tragic accident. But beneath the town's murmurs lay a darker truth, one shrouded in fear, guilt, and suspicion. The disappearance deepened the family's shadowed legacy, stirring paranoia and unraveling the delicate balance of power. For the sisters left behind, it was a haunting void, an echo of loss mingled with dread, as if the vanished sister carried with her the secrets the family was desperate to bury. The father's grip tightened, his rage masked by cold silence, while the community's indifference blurred into complicity. This vanishing was more than a mystery. It was a symptom of a house unraveling from within, a chilling reminder that in the world they inhabited, escape was as dangerous as captivity. The sister who vanished became both ghost and warning, an absence that spoke volumes in a silence no one dared to break. Driven by relentless curiosity and a sense of justice, the investigators stepped into the shadows of the farmhouse, only to find themselves swallowed by the darkness they sought to expose. What began as a professional pursuit quickly spiraled into an obsession, as the layers of secrecy and horror peeled back to reveal a twisted reality that defied comprehension. Each new revelation chipped away at the investigators' sense of certainty, forcing them to confront not just the family's horrors, but their own limits of understanding. The boundary between observer and participant blurred as empathy tangled with revulsion and a creeping dread took root. The investigator grappled with moral ambiguity, how much to push, when to retreat, and whether the pursuit of truth would bring healing or destruction. Their descent was marked by sleepless nights, haunting memories, and the psychological toll of facing evil that seemed both monstrous and painfully human. In this dark journey, the investigator became a mirror reflecting the fragility of sanity when confronted with evil nurtured in silence and shadows. A tragic figure caught between the need to expose darkness and the risk of being consumed by it. The day the farmhouse doors finally swung open was a rupture in time, a violent collision between hidden horrors and the unforgiving light of reality. Authorities entered a world frozen in neglect and fear, stepping over thresholds thick with decades of silence. What they uncovered defied expectation. Rooms heavy with despair, relics of cruelty, and the shattered lives of daughters once imprisoned by shadows. The air was thick with a suffocating mix of decay and lost hope, each corner telling stories too dark for the daylight. The sisters emerged, broken, wary, yet somehow alive, bearing the invisible scars of years trapped beneath an unyielding tyranny. This moment was both a rescue and a reckoning, exposing the devastating cost of silence and isolation. Yet even as the doors opened, the true challenge began. The haunting aftermath of trauma that would ripple far beyond the farmhouse walls. The revelation shattered the town's complacency and forced a community to confront the legacy of darkness it had ignored for too long, raising urgent questions about responsibility, justice, and the fragile hope for healing in the wake of such profound devastation. Freedom came not as a balm but as a new torment, for the surviving sisters were shackled not by physical chains, but by the invisible scars etched deep within their souls. The world outside was unfamiliar and unforgiving, a harsh contrast to the suffocating predictability of their captivity. Memories of abuse and control echoed relentlessly, invading their waking moments and haunting their dreams. Trust was a foreign language, and the simplest kindnesses were met with suspicion or silence. Their fractured minds wrestled with guilt, grief, and a lingering fear that the darkness might follow them beyond the farmhouse walls. Each sister's path to healing was as unique as it was painful. Some sought solace in isolation, others in therapy or tenuous bonds with strangers. But the past was never far, casting long shadows over any hope for normalcy. The echoes of trauma became an unrelenting chorus, a reminder that escape from physical imprisonment did not guarantee freedom from the psychological prison within. Their survival was a testament to resilience, yet also a haunting question. How do you rebuild a shattered identity when the ruins are soaked in pain and silence? The aftermath of revelation thrust the sisters and the entire community into a complex, agonizing battle between justice and mercy. The law demanded punishment for the father's monstrous acts, yet beneath the courtroom's cold formality lay tangled questions of culpability and compassion. How could a family so thoroughly broken be judged without understanding the depths of their captivity? The sisters, victims, and survivors were caught in a liminal space where the line between perpetrator and prisoner blurred. Some argued for harsh justice, fearing that leniency would erase the severity of the crimes committed under the father's shadow. Others pleaded for mercy, recognizing the profound psychological damage that, i.e. complicated notions of guilt and responsibility. The trial became a stage where moral ambiguity played out in full view, where broken souls sought not only retribution, but also a chance at redemption. The community grappled with its own guilt for years of silence, torn between condemnation and forgiveness. This clash exposed the painful reality that justice is rarely black and white, especially when darkness is bred within the walls of family. Ultimately, the struggle forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about accountability, healing, and the fragile balance between punishment and mercy in the shadow of unimaginable horror. The farmhouse, though emptied of its captives, continued to cast a long shadow over South Dakota, its legacy etched into the collective memory like a scar that refused to heal. What had unfolded within those walls became more than a singular tragedy. It transformed into a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones, a dark myth that seeped into local folklore. The sisters' story echoed through generations, a reminder of how isolation, silence, and fear can breed horrors that outlast their physical confines. The house itself stood as a grim monument, abandoned, dilapidated, yet alive in the imaginations of those who dared to remember. For the community, it was a haunting question mark, forcing an uneasy reckoning with complicity, denial, and the limits of human endurance. The legacy also sparked a broader reflection on broken systems, how society's failures to see, intervene, or believe can enable darkness to flourish unchecked. Over time, the house's sinister reputation grew, entwined with warnings about the dangers of secrecy and the corrosive power of family loyalty twisted into tyranny. This legacy lingers, a chilling testament to the fragile boundary between love and control, freedom and captivity, sanity and madness, reminding us all to, "Had some shadows never fully fade." The story of the sisters is not one easily laid to rest. Even after the doors were forced open and the horrors exposed, the shadows lingered, etched into their minds, their bodies, and the very air of the farmhouse that once imprisoned them. Freedom came wrapped in silence and trauma, a reminder that escape is never truly escape when darkness has seeped into every fiber of your being. This was a house where love and cruelty were indistinguishable, where family became a battleground of loyalty and fear, and where innocence was devoured by secrets too heavy to bear. The sisters emerged as both victims and survivors, their fractured souls a mirror reflecting the tragic complexities of human nature, how captivity can be physical, but also psychological and spiritual. Their story unsettles because it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about isolation, control, and the price of silence, not just in one remote farmhouse, but within the hidden corners of every community, every family. The darkness bred here is a stark reminder. Some houses never truly let their daughters go. The echoes of their suffering ripple outward, challenging us to listen, to see, and to break the silence before more lives are swallowed whole by shadows we refuse to face.